If you have a Bible or a device, I invite you to open up to 2 Samuel chapter 2. 2 Samuel chapter 2. We are continuing a survey of the books of 1st and 2nd Samuel. We very valiantly got through 1 Samuel last year, and we dove into 2 Samuel, but just barely. So you're still plenty of time to jump into this, and I hope that you'll follow along. In many ways, 2 Samuel is kind of a long crescendo, right? It kind of builds off of 1 Samuel. David's been pursued by Saul. He has highs and lows of that, and kind of ends on a somewhat of a cliffhanger downer to some degree, right? He's so tired of being pursued by Saul that he says, fine, I'm going to go where the one place Saul won't go. I'm going to go into the Philistine camp, right? I'm going to go find a spot there. He finds a place called Ziklag, and he posts up there. He's still there as we enter into our story in chapter 2. But remember, last week we looked at 2 Samuel 1. If you were here for that, David hears of Saul's death and is already in the process of kind of transformation, restoration, we might call it. He's come back to God, and we're going to see that really in a full circle way in chapter 2. David is finally going to be anointed as king of Judah. Now, again, that's an important caveat. We'll see what happens. David, perhaps one of his greatest triumphs. I've told you this before. Maybe it's because I struggle with patience. Maybe you can empathize there. But again, when David was told that he would become king, that's about 20 years ago from 2 Samuel chapter 2, and we're going to see that it's not even ready to go yet, right? He's going to be anointed king over Judah, but somebody else is going to be put in charge, really kind of a figurehead, if anything, in charge of other parts, and David's going to wait even more time, right? Which might even be harder, because up to this point, again, Saul has been king. There is one king over Israel. David knows that. He's willing to respect that. But at this point, Saul is gone, but David has been put over a small portion, and really someone not super qualified gets put over a larger portion, but David still waits, right? And we're going to see how he handles this. All right, so chapter 2 is a little lengthier chapter, 32 verses, so we're going to read as much as we can, but we're going to skip over just a few chunks that we'll just kind of gloss over and touch on that as we read them through. But let's start reading verses 1 through 4. 1 through 4, David is anointed as king. After this, David inquired of the Lord. I hope that you'll underline that phrase. I think in many ways you could point to a variety of characteristics that at David's best make him as the man that's described after God's own heart, right? There's a lot of characteristics you could point to. David's not perfect. We've already seen that. But his most persistent good quality that shows up all throughout his life, again, not 100% of the time, because you know of stories that are not David's most flattering. We've already seen a few stories that are not David's proudest moments, right? But this phrase, after David inquired of the Lord, maybe one of his most important leadership skills is his willingness and an ability to come to God and say, Lord, I don't see the path forward, right? Now again, I'm going to quit giving you that caveat eventually, but you know stories where David doesn't do this. We've already read stories where David doesn't do this. But as an aggregate, if you look at David's life, he does this a lot. And even the writers here use that exact phrase frequently. David inquired of the Lord. After this, David inquired of the Lord, shall I go up into any of the cities of Judah? And the Lord said to him, go up. And David said, to which shall I go? And he said, to Hebron. So David went up with his two wives, Anaheim of Jezreel and Abigail, the wife of Nabal of Carmel. And David brought up his men who were with him, everyone with his household, and they lived in the towns of Hebron. And the men of Judah came, and they anointed David king over the house of Judah. And when they told David, it was the men of Jabesh Gilead who buried Saul. Now again, I want you to continually, we'll go down through this. David inquired of the Lord. By far had to be one of the, if not the top characteristic that led to David's success, right? Again, David is not Saul physically, He is a great warrior, but he's not physically what Saul was. But he was head and shoulders above Saul in terms of spiritual maturity, inquired of the Lord. And so he's going to ask God. At this point, David is still, as best we can tell it, still in Ziklag. So he's still in Philistine country. And we're going to see that that's going to need to be remedied for any of this to even begin. But David had begun that restoration back to God, and he asks a really aware question, right? Lord, can I go? Should I go back? Can I go back? Is it time to go back? Right? And I think we can empathize with some of it seems simple, but I'm not sure that, I think it's more nuanced than just this. Again, David, I don't think wanted to seem too opportunistic, right? Saul's dead, and so now I'm going to scurry back home, right? But at the same time, again, I don't know that he was overly concerned with what men thought, but I don't know that he was under concerned either. I think he was aware of, I made an error and left, but I cannot fulfill my duty as king from Ziklag. I've got to go for more than one reason. Again, logistically it won't work, but he recognized that being in Philistine country was just a representation of a failure on his part, right? I shouldn't have come, right? And I think God is going to kind of press him to this of, David, you've got to fix this. You've got to come back. Whatever the consequences may be, you got to come back, right? And so the Lord responded. And again, there's something beautiful here because we're at a period of time where it's not unusual for God to respond to people like David and others. But remember, David had been kind of absent from God in some ways for at least a year. We know it for sure he was in Ziklag for a year. And again, this is not a perfect litmus test, but the time David was in Ziklag, in the Philistine camp, really aligned, give or take maybe a month or two, but pretty perfectly to the time that he was really low spiritually. So when he was there, not only was he apart from Israel, but he was apart from Israel, right? Spiritually he was, physically he was. So he understood that I've got to make this right. And we might be inclined to think, is God going to put him on probation? Is he going to have to get weaned back into this, right? I mean, David's made a poor choice. But I think it speaks to the generosity, to the mercy of God, that he is faithful to answer when David inquires in earnest, in faith, right? Lord, I know that I'm in physically the wrong spot, but I need your guidance. He'd come out of that period of decline. God could have given him, some sort of punishment, refused to speak to him for a time, but he gave David that guidance nonetheless. So again, remember, about 20 years ago, David is going to be anointed as king. If you want to make a notation, 1 Samuel 16 is the beginning that we read of all of this. So about 20 years, 15 to 20 years. And we're so close, right, for that being fulfilled. But again, David's going to show some maturity. He doesn't just blindly run into this, right? He sought the Lord's advice. He knew the promise was from God, and he also knew that it was up to God to dictate how this was going to come to be. And that's critical. Because again, David is a smart man. I mean, he is a tactical, I don't want to call him a genius, but we're going to see David is very aware of his surroundings. We see that militarily. We see that interpersonally with the people around him. Spiritually, he's aware of this. And so, again, think of this from a leader's perspective. He has left Israel. Now, that did not go unnoticed. We know that because David was a minor to mid-major celebrity, still, dating back to what he did with Goliath, and he continued to have successes like that. But also, he was seen with the Philistines. He was across from them in battle. Now, again, God spared him from being in the thick of it, but he was there. So word got around that, we've not seen David in Israel for a year plus. This was not, just your average, Joe townsperson. This is David. And so he's been gone. And so can you imagine from a leader's perspective, you're gone, you abandon your people. Again, there's reasons why. We can empathize all this time looking back, but put yourself in any soldier's shoes. he leaves. And then you try to come back and say, it's my time to be king, right? When the going got hard, I left and went to go to Ziklag, but now Saul's gone, my problem's gone, and now I want to come and reap the rewards. But you notice, again, I love the way this is pointed out to us. This was not just David bringing this back. Again, let's go to verse 4. And the men of Judah came, and there they anointed David king over the house of Judah. I would give a lot to know more of the dialogue that happened. But clearly, it wasn't David coming back and planting his flag and saying, it's my time, make me king, right? God told me I'd be king, make me king. He comes after God had already greenlit this, right? He went to God for advice. God says, go back. And then he comes back and the people see David and they seek David out and say, David, we want you in leadership, right? The very best possible scenario for any leader is that you have the support of the people to say, we want you to take that spot, right? We are positioning you to be that spot. Now let's keep reading verses 4 down through verse 7. So he has been anointed king over just Judah. Now we'll talk about that more in a minute. But they told David it was the men of Jabesh Gilead who buried Saul. And so David sent messengers to the men of Jabesh Gilead and said to them, may you be blessed by the Lord because you have shown this loyalty to Saul your Lord and buried him. And now may the Lord show steadfast love and faithfulness to you, and I will do good to you because you have done this thing. Now therefore let your hands be strong and be valiant, for Saul your Lord is dead, and the house of Judah has anointed me king over them. Again, you have shown this kindness to your Lord, to Saul. David shows appropriate gratitude to the men who risk their lives in many ways to appropriately honor Saul. And there's kind of there's a lesson to be learned here, probably in and of itself, because again, Saul is not the pillar of spiritual guidance towards the end of his life. He is not what you would emulate, right? But he was in leadership nonetheless. God appointed leadership. Again, we're not going to go down the rabbit hole of government and leaders and things like this, but this was Peter's advice in the New Testament, right? That God knows and appoints things far beyond our understanding, and it is our job, so much as it still aligns with the statutes of God's will and law and things like that. But it is up to us to show gratitude and respect. It's not us to judge the moral character, because every man is flawed, but he's been positioned there by God. I think Saul is a pretty good representative of, you pick any position in history and you're going to have a flawed leader that we hope is trying their best. But Old Testament scripture says this of Saul. New Testament scripture says of it, evil emperors, evil Caesars. And they said, God has them there for reasons that maybe aren't aware to you or any of us. And that's God's prerogative. And if we trust that he controls it all, there's a level of respect there that is not ours to take away. It's not the point of this lesson, but I'd be remiss if we didn't say it, because that's what David is pointing to here, I think, very astutely, right? He's saying Saul was king. Thank you for honoring that. That's what he's telling these men, right? He says, you've shown kindness to Saul. He says, let your hands be strengthened and be valiant. Again, knew that he would need brave men as they went on. Okay, 8 through 11. Gets interesting here because another king is set up over different territories. We'll just read it. All right, 8 through 11. But Abner, the son of Ner, commander of Saul's army. Now, remember, he's been around for a while. If you've been following us, if you've been reading through 1 Samuel, this name does not sound unfamiliar to you. He was, as best as we can tell it, as scripture points us to, he was Saul's number 2. I mean, he was a general in Saul's army, right? So, again, he is very clearly pro-Saul, even though Saul is dead. So that's who this is, but we'll keep looking at this. Took Ishbosheth, the son of Saul. Now, you may think, Keaton, I thought all of Saul's sons are dead. That's what we read at the end of 1 Samuel. Most commentators will tell you is that this was a child from an illegitimate marriage, probably a concubine, because the sons of Saul that are listed with him and those that went to battle with him when he died did die, right? But this clearly still lists as a son of Saul. So more than likely with a concubine or something to that effect. And brought him over to Mahanaim, and he made him king over Gilead of the Asherites and Jezreel and Ephraim and Benjamin and all Israel. Ishbosheth, Saul's son, was 40 years old, and he began to reign over Israel, and he reigned 2 years. But the house of Judah followed David. And at that time, David was king in Hebron over the house of Judah was 7 years and 6 months. Now again, so let's go back through this. Abner, the son of Ner. Abner was Saul's cousin. We know this. Go back to 1 Samuel 14 and verse 50. And he was also the top general of Saul's armies for years. For most of 1 Samuel that we've read up to this point, Abner has been a major player in. Again, David has met him. If you go back to 1 Samuel 17, when David was a young man, David had met Abner. And there was even communication back and forth. Now again, Ishbosheth was the son of Saul. Saul had 3 sons that we know died in battle in 1 Samuel 31 and verse 6. Up to this point, there's never been a mention of Ishbosheth. So again, we don't know exactly, but it tells me that if there's no mention of this up to this point, this is not a legitimate heir, a son of Saul, or this would have clearly been in the fold up to this point, and there's no mention. So it aligns probably more with an illegitimate son. And again, David was too by marriage. Again, married one of Saul's daughters back in 1 Samuel 18. But Abner made him king. Now, why would he do this? Like a lot of things, I mean, this is not dissimilar from power struggles we see all throughout the world, right? You're able to put a heir, right? Someone that has connection to the legitimate seat of power and government, but they kind of they're the face of it, and then you got somebody behind the strings that pull all the shots, right? This is more than likely what Abner was doing. Again, he was Saul's number 2 for a long time, 15 to 20 years, maybe a little bit more. So he had every reason, personally, financially, power-wise, I mean, every possible motivation to stay in power. And so this would have been one of the easier ways to do this. But again, he only reigns for 2 years. But here's the interesting part. David lets this happen for 2 years. Is that a long time in the grand scheme of regimes? No, not really. But David had been waiting 20 to get to this point. And now you've got what is more than likely an illegitimate son of Saul that is positioned over a larger section. David's got Judah. But again, I think you see a lot of parallels here, right? You see patience. You see long-suffering, right? Characteristics that God himself, we know, has. And David is willing to trust that God is the epitome of those, and that if God is allowing this to take place, then this is part of the plan. Again, Ishbosheth was not the Lord's anointed like Saul was at the time. Again, David seemed to have every right to stomp this out, but David had greater trust in the Lord, and I think partly respect for Saul and for his lineage and memory and all the other parts of this. Again, Chris Carroll and I were talking this morning about, at the very end of 1 Samuel, talking about the love that David had for Jonathan, greater than the love of a woman, which is just such a unique phrase that I've thought about that all afternoon. And as far as I can tell, about the only spot that it's described quite like that. So not only does David have, again, that's his father-in-law, it was a mentor. He is placed in position of power by God. His son is David's closest friend by a country mile. I mean, they are brothers, they are family, they are every sense of the word connected. And so David has a lot of reason to still be respectful for Saul. Again, that's so counterculture to us, right? Most of us would want to kick the door down and say, it's my time, leave. But David was a different animal. And again, he serves for 7 years, almost 8 years, the period that David had headquarters in Hebron. And again, for the first 2 of these, he ruled over Judah alone. Again, Ishbosheth had, Abner was, through Ishbosheth, ruled the rest of Israel. But David is going to refuse to force this on everybody else. Again, one of the great leadership qualities of David. But then we see, let's go down to verse 12, and we're going to see war really break out, in for lack of a better phrase, between Judah and every other tribe in Israel. Let's go 12 through 17. Abner, the son of Ner, and the servants of Ishbosheth and the son of Saul went out to Mahanaim to Gibeon, and Joab, the son of Zeruiah, and the servants of David went out and met them at the pool of Gibeon, and they sat down, and one on the one side of the pool and the other on the other side of the pool, and Abner said to Joab, "Let the young men arise and compete before us." And Joab said, "Let them arise." And they arose and passed over by number, 12 for Benjamin and Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, and 12 for the servants of David. And each caught his opponent by the head and thrust his sword into his side, and so they fell down. And therefore that place was called Helkai Hazarim, which is in Gideon. And the battle was very fierce that day. And Abner and the son of men of Israel were beaten before the sons of David. So we read of Joab, and again, if you go back to 1 Samuel 22, Joab was probably one of the ones who joined David in the caves, again, around this time. Joab is going to have 2 brothers. We'll talk about them in a moment. All of them were David's nephews. We see this, if you go to 1 Chronicles chapter 2, was the sons of one of David's sister. But remember, David is the baby of the family, so it's very likely that his nephews may have been his age or even older, right? But they are family, and so that creates a dynamic here. But Abner is going to say to Joab, again, this confrontation is really unique. Abner and Joab were each military men, and completely devoted to what they were doing. Now, 18 through verse 23, we are going to see two of the son or the brothers of Joab are going to. Abner is going to kill one of them. So 18 through verse 23, we're going to skip just for the sake of time. But in this, again, we're going to see Ashiel is going to pursue Abner. Lay hold of one of the young men and take his armor. And so the thought there is they're going to take the armor as a trophy, right? This is a really unique kind of battle that they're going on through here. But again, Abner is going to strike him in the side, and we're going to jump ahead to verse 24 for just the sake of time. 24 through 28 is going to lead us up to the end of the chapter, and a ceasefire is really going to come down here. So Joab and Ashiel pursued Abner, and the sun was going down, and they came to the hill of Ammah, which lies before Giah on the way to the wilderness of Gibeon, and the people of Benjamin gathered themselves together behind Abner, and because one group, and took their stand on the top of the hill. And Abner called to Joab, "Shall the sword devour forever? Do you not know that the end will be bitter? How long will it be before you tell your people to turn from the pursuit of their brothers?" And Joab said, "As God lives, if you had not spoken, surely the men would have not given up their pursuit of their brothers until the morning." So Joab blew the trumpet, and all the men stopped and pursued Israel no more, nor did they fight any longer. Again, that phrase, "shall the sword devour forever." Again, the armies here are ready to die. 2 brothers that wanted revenge. But now at this point, again, Abner's going to find it easier to take a plea of peace. Again, advantageous to him because they're about to come to a very, very bloody stalemate where really nothing is going to be gained. And so Joab is going to blow this trumpet, and all the people are going to stand still. They agree to this ceasefire. I mean, this would have been a civil war. I mean, these are the same people. These are brothers that are fighting together, right? I mean, again, we see examples of this all throughout Scripture. We have examples of this even in our own history, but it does not go well, right? It does not go well when we do not have a cleanly defined enemy. When you're talking about ideological enemies, but you are maybe literal family, you are certainly, kinsmen in one way or another, it just never goes good. And so they were really on the heels of something pretty nasty. And so by the providence of God, they decide to stop. So we'll read 29 through the end of the chapter, and I would like to read into chapter 3, verse 1 of chapter 3. Just it all kind of connects together. And Abner and his men went all through the night. The Arabah, they crossed the Jordan, and marching the whole morning they came to Mahanaim. And Joab returned from the pursuit of Abner, and when he had gathered all the people together, they were missing from David's servants 19 men besides Ashiel. But the servants of David had struck down of Benjamin 360 of Abner's men, and they took up Ashiel and buried him in the tomb of his father, which was in Bethlehem. And Joab and his men marched all night, and by daybreak they were upon Hebron. And that was a long war between the house of Saul and the house of David, and David grew stronger. Pay attention here. Highlight this. This is foreshadowing. This is key. David grew stronger and stronger while the house of Saul became weaker and weaker. Again, David, the missing servants of David's men were 19 plus Ashiel. So you're talking about 20. The army of Ishbosheth lost 360 men. Not quite sure what that multiple is, but they lost many, many times what the servants of David is how it's described. Again, this was a long war between the house of Saul. Again, this is the struggle here. Again, the ceasefire seemed to make things better, right? But in some ways, it continued to make things worse. I mean, this was still a feud between Saul and between David. David grew stronger, right? The increasing strength of David, the decreasing strength of Saul. Again, that didn't just take place when Saul died. Again, I think in many ways, you could circle this back to 1 Samuel 16, right? That's when the Spirit of the Lord left Saul and when it entered into David. And from that point on, I mean, they are oil and water. I mean, they are fighting against each other, not just physically, but David is continuing to rise. I mean, they are inversely connected. Every time Saul weakens, David is strengthened, right? Because David is God's anointed. He is the one that God has picked to lead this. But it's going to take 25 years, approximately. I mean, a long time. All right, 3 things. Oh, we're close on time. All right, 3 things I'd like to offer you out of 2 Samuel chapter 3. Number 1, seek God's direction before taking any next steps. I cannot understate how critical this was of not only a personal success for David, but a leadership triumph that led to David's personal success, Israel's success. I mean, everything that David touched grew and was multiplied, but not because he was, that great. David was a tremendous warrior. But again, I think everything we know of David is through the lens of his willingness to yield to God. I mean, I don't see anything that gives us an indication that David was, something special in and of itself, apart from what God had given to him and allowed for him to have happen, right? Sometimes things that happened for him, sometimes like in the case of when the Philistines and Israel were fighting, God allowed David to be removed for that. I mean, God's hand was on David. Saul had multiple opportunities to try and kill David, and he did try. Came really close, but he never quite did because, again, David sought God's direction. He doesn't rush into leadership. Even after Saul's death, right? Even though he's been appointed king years earlier, he says, Lord, what shall I do? Where shall I go? God's promises don't remove our need for prayerful dependence. God is faithful. God will deliver what he promises, but there's still an opportunity, a responsibility for us to come before him in prayer. I think David and Jesus are a beautiful New Testament, Old Testament parallel, but these are people. Jesus, of course, is God, is perfect. David is probably as close, David, maybe Job, out of the Old Testament, and both of these men, in their times of need and not, came to God and say, Lord, what will you have me to do? Number my steps. Where would you like me to go? Jesus went in prayer. He's God. He is God incarnate. He's God walking around, and he still went to God in prayer. Again, don't let opportunity replace obedience. Every major decision, career, relationships, ministry, family, Lord, what is your next step for me? Again, David had the privilege of hearing God very directly, but you and I still have the opportunity through his word, through his church, that we can be nudged in the right directions, the right paths that we should go. All right, number 2, honor others. We talked about this briefly, but honor others even when it costs you. Again, David is going to honor the men of Jabesh Gilead for burying Saul, the ones who tried to kill him. Saul, the man who tried to kill him multiple times, who pursued him for years, but he knew it was the right thing to do. May the Lord show steadfast love and faithfulness. Godly character shows up in how we treat people who make our life hard. Godly character shows up in how we treat the people that make our lives the most difficult. We talked about that a little bit last week in our discipleship Sunday morning, but David gives us a good example here. You don't have to approve of somebody's actions to honor what is right. David does this. Number 3, rivalry and pride always lead to unnecessary conflict. Rivalry and pride will always lead to unnecessary conflict. Again, what started really as a contest in many ways between the servants of David and Ishbosheth, it escalates into deadly war. I mean, this close to an all-out civil war that would have altered Israel's history forever. All because of pride, right? When pride is allowed to drive the decisions, everyone loses. Everybody. There isn't a winner in that scenario. Again, not every battle needs to be fought. Sometimes we need to pursue, but we need to learn just as well when to stop. Right? David is a beautiful example. And again, we're going to see as we kind of crescendo through 1 Samuel into 2 Samuel, as you keep reading with me, you're going to see David continue to rise and rise and rise. All of it comes back to, again, what we see at the very beginning of this chapter and many others. David inquired of the Lord. That is to just say, Lord, what would you have me do? We see many New Testament examples of this, of people coming before God. Lord, what would you have me to do? Jesus himself comes before God. Lord, what would you have me to do? And we get the clear example in the New Testament of, he says, what do you need to do? Go be baptized. Go be part of my family, right? The greatest, the ultimate decision, right, is that and that alone. Tonight, if you aren't a Christian, we want to give you that opportunity to come and put on Christ in baptism. If you have any gospel need tonight, come let us know about it as we stand and as we sing together.